Welcome back to Giant Monster Games. My name is Adrian, and today I hope you have brought your family heirlooms. I need to make a joke about artifacts, okay? And I couldn't think of any that really work. I was like, we're gonna go exploring, but explore is an actual mechanic as well. You guys get the idea. This is a budget Affinity deck. Before we actually break it down though, if you want to pick this deck up or any deck on the channel up in paper, go over to Flipside Gaming, use promo code GiantMonsterGames to get 10% off your online purchase. Or if you want to pick this deck up for MTGO, there is a link to Card Hoarder where you can pick up this deck. It is all put together there for you, so it is quick and snappy and easy, and it also helps support the channel. Okay, so what exactly is Affinity? Well, Affinity is a artifact deck that is an artifact aggro deck. We are using cards like Thoughtcast. Originally, when this deck was Affinity forever ago, it also ran stuff like Frogmite and Mere Enforcer, which we are not running in this deck, but they are also Affinity cards. Affinity is a mechanic where the more of something you have, the cheaper the card costs. So, in the case of Thoughtcast, which we are running in this deck, Thoughtcast costs 1 colorless mana less for every single artifact you have in play, so we can potentially, and we are actually aiming to, cast this card for a single blue mana. So 1 blue mana, draw 2 cards, seems pretty cool. If we don't have a whole bunch of artifacts in play, it's going to cost us more than that potentially, but this entire deck is almost all artifacts, so this shouldn't be very hard for us. Now, this is the only Affinity card we actually have in the deck, because this deck has evolved since it was actually Affinity and had a whole bunch of other Affinity cards, so it still has the name even though the deck has changed. So, speaking of artifacts, let's talk about the artifact creatures we are running in this deck. The first two are Memnite and Ornithopter. They are both 0-cost artifacts that neither of them really do much on their own. So, Ornithopter is a 0-2 flyer, which is fun, but it costs 0, and Memnite is a 1-1 for 0, and it is an artifact creature as well, so they aren't doing a lot on their own, but they are adding to our artifact package. The next two creatures we have are Vault Skirge and Etched Champion. Now, Vault Skirge has lifelink, which is kind of important for the deck because we are an aggro deck. We need to be surging in as quick as possible to get damage in, and if we can make this guy a little bit bigger, which we have ways of doing, he can actually allow us to stabilize and push through into the late game, or push through damage once we get to the late game, I should say. Etched Champion, on the other hand, has Metalcraft, so if we control 3 or more artifacts, he is an artifact creature himself, so he counts as one of those 3 artifacts. He has protection from all colors, which in Modern is basically like saying you have 95% protection from most things. He can chump block almost anything, and he can't really be blocked by anything, so again, if we make him bigger, he can either chump block for days or swing in for a whole bunch of damage, which is pretty awesome. Now, I kind of mentioned making all of these creatures bigger. We have Chief of the Foundry and Signal Pest as the creatures that are going to be doing that. Chief of the Foundry just gives other artifact creatures +1/+1, so he's just making all of our board bigger, which is super fantastic. Signal Pest, on the other hand, has Battlecry, which is whenever he attacks, he gives each other attacking creature +1/+0 until end of turn, and the cool thing about Signal Pest is he can only be blocked by flying creatures or creatures with reach, so usually he can attack in without any worries because there's not that much stuff in the format that has flying. Flying is a pretty underused or underutilized ability in Magic Gathering, specifically in Modern, I should say. There are some decks that use it, but in this case, we are running this guy relatively safely because there's not that many, actually. So he's going to be pumping our team just like Chief of the Foundry. They are going to be making our team bigger and bigger and bigger, so we're swinging with a really big amount of artifacts. The other artifacts we have in this deck is we have Cranial Plating and Springleaf Drum. Now, they're doing completely different things. Springleaf Drum allows us to tap any untapped creature we control, obviously, and add 1 mana of any color to our mana pool, which is good for mana fixing. Also, we don't have very many lands in this deck, so it's going to allow us to do some extra mana if we need it down the road. It gives us an artifact, and in some cases, like with Cranial Plating, it's going to be adding to the number of artifacts we have, which is going to be quite fantastic because Cranial Plating gives a creature +1/+0 for each artifact we control, and because our deck is almost entirely artifacts, this is going to make one creature very, very big, which is absolutely fantastic. It is a 1 colorless mana equip cost, but it does have an ability which is black, attach Cranial Plating to target creature you control, so that can be done at instant speed, which is really exciting. Unfortunately, this deck doesn't have a lot of ways of producing black mana, but in the upgrade sections, the first thing you should consider is a way of being able to produce black mana a lot easier, so you can do the Cranial Plating switch at instant speed, which makes artifacts really scary. Now, the next section I want to talk about, I'm going to call explosives, because we also have a little bit of red blowing uppy stuff in this deck, specifically Galvanic Blast and Shrapnel Blast. I should have called this section Blasts, not Explosives. explosions. Well, too late now. Anyways, they are both doing a similar thing. They are doing direct damage to target creature or player. Galvanic Blast allows us to do 2 damage to target creature or player for 1 red mana, which is fine, but it can do 4 damage if we have 3 or more artifacts. Surprise, surprise, we should have a lot of artifacts in play, which shouldn't be very hard to do. And then Shrapnel Blast does 5 damage to target creature or player. We do have to sacrifice an artifact to play this, which, again, in our deck isn't really that problematic. We have a ton of artifacts, so we can be using these two to close out the game, or in some cases get rid of really big, hard to deal with creatures. I mean, Galvanic Blast and Shrapnel Blast usually have enough power to get rid of a Tarmogoyf, get rid of some big nasty stuff that is just over 3, which is very common in Modern. You see a lot of creatures that have toughness 4 because they can't be removed by Lightning Bolt. These both cards get around that by, well, doing more than 3 damage. So this is the plan of our explosives, which I should have called Blast section. And the last part of the main deck is our land package. We are running Darksteel Citadel and Shivan Reef. Obviously, Darksteel Citadel is an artifact land, which is why we're playing it. It produces colorless mana, so we can't use it for some of the colored things we need, but it's not the end of the world because we'd rather have more artifacts. And then Shivan Reef is just a pain land, so we can use it to create red or blue mana, whatever we feel like it. And then the last thing in the deck, we have basic lands. We have islands, mountains, and swamps. Not that surprising. Even though we don't generally need them, we need them in a couple fringe cases. Mountains are obviously the most important in this setup. Now, if you're going to take this deck out to F&M, you're going to want a sideboard, so let's talk about the sideboard. The first 3 cards we have is Whipflare, Mana Leak, and Ancestral Grudge. They are dealing with a variety of things. Whipflare is obviously dealing with go-wide strategies because we can do 2 damage to each non-artifact creature, which, I mean, all of our stuff is artifacts, so we don't really care. Usually this can wipe away a whole bunch of Lingering Souls or a bunch of Soul Sister stuff if we want to go up against Soul Sisters. It's doing a lot of good stuff for us, so keep this card nearby and ready at your holster. I'm not even sure what I'm talking about anymore. And Mana Leak, obviously, we're doing some counter magic if we need to, and then Ancestral Grudge if we need to destroy other artifacts. Something you're going to come across very common when you're playing this deck is you're going to run up against Ensnaring Bridge, which is going to slow you down, so having some artifact removal is very handy. This is what it's being used for. And then the second 2 cards in our sideboard is Crumble to Dust and Tormod's Crypt. Crumble to Dust, obviously for Tron or Manlands, and then Tormod's Crypt is dealing with graveyard strategies. A lot of times, Dredge tends a little bit faster than us, so having a way of getting rid of their graveyards when we're going up against Dredge is a good thing for us. Also, Tormod's Crypt is an artifact. Just kind of works in the synergies with us. And that is the entire deck, but a budget deck is never complete without an upgrade section, so let's talk about some upgrades so you guys can take this to a more competitive state, seeing as how Affinity is an actual very competitive deck right now, so why not build this one if you're going to be playing a little bit more competitive? Okay, enough talking, let's talk about upgrades. The first one and foremost is Chief of the Foundry can be taken out. He's not actually that good compared to the other 2 upgrades we have, which is Master of Ethereum and Steel Overseer. Usually Affinity runs 6, so either 3 and 3 or 4 Overseers and 2 Master of Ethereums. So this is what you want to be doing if you're going to be upgrading the deck. This is probably the first single best upgrade you can be doing is upgrading your actual beef up package, because if you can use Steel Overseer to start putting 1/1 counters on all of your stuff, you're going to overwhelm your opponent really quickly, especially because Affinity is really good at kind of dumping your hand by turn 2, turn 3. And think about it this way, turn 3 or turn 4, if you are putting a Steel Overseer in play and then giving, say, 6 of your creatures +1/+1 counters, that's gonna get real scary real fast, and you're gonna make your opponent feel like, how do I deal with this again? So these are your first upgrades you should be considering because they're just both way better than Chief of the Foundry. The next 2 upgrade cards, we have Arcbound Ravager and Mox Opal. These are just general high value artifact cards, specifically because Arcbound Ravager can sacrifice any of our artifacts, so if we need to chump block, we can just sacrifice it and then put counters onto Arcbound Ravager, making him bigger and bigger and bigger. And then when Arcbound Ravager dies, he actually has modular, which means he gets to move those counters to another artifact creature you control. So, I mean, you're all artifact creatures here. We can just move them onto other artifacts, which makes him really scary because we don't lose a lot of value by losing creatures, which is awesome if you ask me. Mox Opal, on the other hand, is just a better way of getting mana because it has Metalcraft, and its Metalcraft ability is tap it, add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool, activate this only if you have 3 or more artifacts. So Again, it's a 0-drop artifact that gets to create mana for us. A lot of times, turn 2, we can actually, or even turn 1 sometimes, we can actually be activating Mox Opal. Mox Opal is very expensive, this is why it's not in this deck, but if you are going to play this deck more competitively, highly consider putting this in. The third set of upgrades, not necessarily the third in priority, is Blinkmoth Nexus and Inkmoth Nexus. These are both really good because they are artifact creature manlands, so we can turn them into a 1/1 Blinkmoth creature with flying, and it is an artifact creature, so it gets bonuses from all of the artifact bonus stuff we get, so we can swing in for 1/1. Instead of having to use it to get land, we can actually use it to swing in and do damage, so manlands are amazing if you have the upgrade. Obviously, Blinkmoth Nexus is actually within reach if you are looking to upgrade. I would actually put 4 of them in the deck and take out a bunch of the islands and swamps and mountains if you can, because these are really good. I would highly, highly recommend running Blinkmoth Nexus, and if you have the extra money, a couple Inkmoth Nexuses as well. And then the last set of upgrades are more lands. We have Glimmer Void and Spire of Industry. They are, again, giving us any color mana, assuming we have artifacts, because our entire deck is artifact themed and has a ton of artifacts. They are generally not going to have any problem doing this. Glimmer Void gets sacrificed if we have no artifacts, so if all of our artifacts get destroyed, that's not very good for us, but again, we have a ton of artifacts, this shouldn't be a problem. And then Spire of Industry is we pay 1 life, add 1 mana of any color to our mana pool, activates the ability only if we control an artifact. And you guys can get it already. We have a lot of artifacts in the deck. Why not use this? Then we don't need to be running a whole bunch of weird basic lands. We actually have a way of creating all of the mana we could possibly need in all these different colors, because we're actually a 3-color deck, which is kind of weird. Kind of a 3-color deck, mostly colorless, but kind of a 3-color deck. So this is one of the many ways of us creating that mana without having to run a bunch of basic lands. And we could actually probably go down on the number of lands. I would say if you're running all of the mana producing, mana fixing stuff, you could probably go down to 17 rather than 18 lands. And that is the entire Budget Affinity deck. I do want to throw a huge shout out to Daniel because he was the one that actually sent in this deck. I made a bunch of changes to make it so it's a little bit more budget friendly because his version was a little bit more expensive. I will put a link to this version of the deck and his version of the deck in the description below this video if you want to go take a look at the actual deck tech on tappedout.com. And until next time, my name is Adrian, this is GiantMonsterGames. Subscribe to the channel if you want to see more videos just like this, and don't forget to game like a giant monster. Thanks for watching the video. If you want to see this video and other videos just like it, don't forget to smash that subscribe button and hit the little bell beside it so you don't miss any of the videos. Additionally, I want to throw a huge shout out to all of the Patreon supporters. You guys are helping make videos just like this every single week.